All right, guys. Hey, welcome everybody to our webinar today on Section 8 rentals. And if we have time at the end, we will implement a little Ask the Manager. Any questions that you may have for our property management expert that we have here today. So, it's all going to be about how to accept a Section 8 tenant and what's involved and how to make money doing that, etc. Before we get started on that, I want to introduce our team. West Peak Properties. I'm Brad Ulick. My business partner here is Jay Peterson. And then we have an associate broker that works on our team. His name is Charlie Middlehouse. You may hear from him from time to time. And here's how you get a hold of us. Here's all of our phone numbers, email addresses, etc. We're happy to talk to you about anything and any questions that you have. What we do, West Peak Properties, basically our mission is to help you create cash flow and build wealth through investing in real estate. We are a full service brokerage company specializing in residential investment properties. And generally we do anything from a condo to a 12-unit apartment. We have been known to do larger things from time to time, but our real niche is in that smaller multifamily space. We can help you find it, analyze it, finance it, manage it, sell it, 1031 exchange it, all the good stuff that comes along with being good brokers, etc. And because we have experience with our own properties, we can help you through most questions that you're going to have, help you find people to help you with contractors, plumbers, electricians, anything that goes on around investing in real estate. We've been doing this since 2009. We have a lot of combined experience. We've closed hundreds of transactions over that time period. We also have a pretty extensive network of investors that we built up over the years. So a fair amount of our transactions every year are off market. If you have something to sell or you are looking to buy, definitely want to reach out to us because we may know of something or be able to help you sell that property to one of our own investors and save on some commission. We do not manage property directly. However, we do work with experienced property management partners like the one that we have with us today. We have vetted these partners out pretty well for you and we use them ourselves. One last bullet point here is we are a brokerage company and we are looking for other brokers that may want to join our company. If you are an investor that wants to hang your license somewhere, or you are a broker that wants to work with investors, we would love to chat with you about that. We do these webinars every 3 months or so as topics come up, etc. Our next webinar will be on proposed tax law changes with our CPA partner. You can find our past webinars on our website at westpeakproperties.com in the education tab. Our last webinar was on Airbnb best practices. We've done them on property management best practices, 1031 exchanges. Today's will be posted after we are complete and we have the recording. We will send that out to all the attendees and then post that on our website as well. For today's discussion, we have Mike Hoover with us here from Mavi Unlimited. Mike, Jay, and I will be discussing the logistics of how to accept a Section 8 tenant, how to find and qualify those tenants, how you get paid, how to handle issues if they arise. Jay and I have been managing our own portfolio for 10 plus years, and we deal almost exclusively with Section 8 tenants. And so we have a vast level of experience in this area. So as we go through this presentation, we'll chime in from time to time. And if anybody has any questions related to our actual experience with tenants or our actual experience with situations, feel free to ask that as we go along. And then if we have time at the end, we will definitely open this up to any and all questions for our property management expert, Mike Hoover. Here's Mike and how to get a hold of Mike. Mike is with Mavi Unlimited Property Management. There's their website, there's his phone number and his email address. A little bit about Mike. As we said before, he's the owner of Mavi Unlimited Property Management. They manage around 600 units for over 100 different clients. Mike lives in Erie, has 2 daughters, and I guess a slightly annoying puppy that he purchased during COVID. We know Mike personally. We've known him for a couple of years. Jay and I also have Mike manage some of our own properties as well. So we're familiar with Mike. We're very comfortable. We would recommend Mike any day, anytime. And so, Mike, I'm going to let you take over right now, and then we can get into the meat of the slides on Section 8 tenants.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Jay. Hello, everybody. So again, my name is Mike Hoover. I'm the owner of Mavi Unlimited Property Management. Here's all my relevant contact info. That'll be at the end, and I think you guys will get a link to the slide recording after the fact as well.
Hey, Mike, I just want to throw in real quick that as people have questions as we go through, we do have the chat line open, et cetera, and Jay's going to manage that chat line for us. So feel free to ask questions as we go.
Yeah, I'll stop and alert with any kind of questions.
Perfect. So we were talking about housing vouchers and the what they are, the how to use them. We're going to start this with just a general discussion of what is Section 8. Technically, we're referring to any sort of assistance-based tenancy, which can be a lot of different things. And so Section 8 is the phrase that gets thrown out the most, but there's a lot of different programs through individual cities, counties, states, etc. Some quick examples of providers. If you are investors in the Denver area, you may or may not have heard of these people, but Denver Housing Authority, Arapahoe Housing Authority, Jefferson County, Metro West, Colorado Department of Housing, Coalition for the Homeless, the VASH Veterans Housing Program. Basically, prospective tenants apply and they either get accepted or they're put on a wait list. And there's various criteria for every different program.
And when you say they apply to the housing authority directly to obtain a Section 8 or a otherwise a voucher from that housing authority.
Yes, they need to apply to be in that program, and oftentimes there is a pretty substantial waiting list. So it's a big deal to get on that list and to be accepted. And a lot of folks do want to try to stay on it for as long as possible. So how to accept Section 8? First thing you need to do is have a tenant with a voucher from one of the aforementioned providers. You're going to have that person apply like normal. So like any other tenant that you'd find for one of your rental properties. At our company, we do the typical checking of credit scores, criminal history, eviction history, landlord's income, pay, all that good stuff. Even though you are going to receive the income from a housing association, you still want to do a thorough background because it does paint that sort of comprehensive top to bottom picture of overall responsibility. And also, housing vouchers do not necessarily mean all of the rent is being paid. If a tenant works part-time, housing will pay a portion with the tenant making up the difference on their own end. So you do want to make sure that you're doing a thorough background check and not just say, oh, I'm getting rent from a government agency. I don't need to be as concerned about tenant quality. You will be working with a representative or a caseworker. It varies from group to group, but generally speaking, you will have a few points of contact within an organization that you'll be dealing with, whether it's talking about issues with the resident or how to collect payment, etc. There are lots of people working at some of these organizations. You'll have caseworkers, advocates, accounting departments, landlord recruiters. So do be prepared to have a few different people for various roles.
I think they like to be called housing specialists.
Housing specialists. So you are still going to have a lease with these people, but then there is going to be a separate HAP, which stands for a Housing Assistance Program. We'll use HAP throughout this presentation. There's going to be a separate HAP contract to go along in conjunction with your lease. So your lease with all your terms is still there, but the HAP contract is going to be a separate contract that's going to reiterate the rent, reiterate lease expiration dates, and you're going to need to have both of those. The HAP contract doesn't provide you with any protection in a court situation, and your lease does not entitle you to be set up with HAP. So you need to kind of manage those two sets of paperwork. Once you have a tenant that you are looking to rent to, you need to have your unit ready to pass inspection. And so these housing agencies are going to want to visit the unit and check to make sure it meets their standard. For us at our company, we always use the mantra clean, safe, and functional. If you follow those three parameters, generally speaking, you're going to be on the right track. But functionality is probably the most important here. You need to make sure the window's open, there are window screens, there are blinds that work, doors that lock, etc. All the appliances need to work. Example I use here below is if you had a missing kitchen drawer, or maybe a stove with 4 electric coils, one of the electric coils is out, you need to make sure everything in there is completely functional, because they will fail the inspection, and then you need to get back in line waiting for them to re-inspect. And until that place passes inspection, your tenant is not allowed to move in, and your HAP contract does not officially start until that tenant takes possession. Again, clean, safe, and functional is a general rule of thumb.
So if I fail, typically it's because I'm missing a battery in one of my smokies, one of my smoke alarms. It's just that simple. It's not like they require you to have anything special going on. They just want to make sure it's safe and functional, like you said.
I failed a test here just a few weeks ago, just because I had a small water leak in one of my bathtubs in the main, and I got it fixed within a couple hours, and I sent her the video, and oftentimes that's what the inspector wants.
Yeah.
They don't need to come back. All you got to do is send pictures and video, and they'll pass it right there.
Yeah, if it's something minor and you can prove you fixed it and send it to them, then that keeps them from having to come back out.
Yeah.
So the big question that a lot of people have is how is rent determined? We often find that housing pays slightly above what we would consider market rent. So they have their own example of what they would like to pay for a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, a 3-bedroom, etc. And then they'll adjust that accordingly for amenities, the age, the condition of the property, the quality of the finishes. Market rent essentially is what a prospective tenant is willing to pay. And so when you have a HAP situation coming in here, they're looking at that average market rent adjusted to sort of their standards, their opinion. But our experience is typically that you get a slight bump because, again, market rent technically is what someone's willing to give you. And so if you are taking out that sort of negotiated rent with a prospective tenant, and it's just a set rate minus whatever their adjustments are, we see that being a little bit of an increase. It's not huge. We're talking maybe $50 or $100 a month, but sometimes it can be more, and it does add up, especially if you have more than one unit.
Yeah, I think it depends obviously on the type of property that you're renting, right? If you're renting a high-end home, you're probably not going to get as much from Section 8 as you would from a market renter. But generally, we're talking about B and C class properties here. I added to your slide, Mike, this website here where you can actually figure out what HUD is willing to pay fair market rents in your county, in your city, in your state. And so you can go search that up and see what their standard is, and then they'll check their standard against what is happening in your particular community, right? So if you have a 30-unit community, a 30-unit property, and you're getting $1,500 a month for 2 bedrooms, they're probably not going to want to give you 16, right? They're going to check that, even though their standard for the city, state, and area county that you're in might be 1,700, right? So.
Yeah, and then Brad, you're making a good point too. I am assuming that we're talking about B and C class rental grade units, whether those are condos or a small apartment complex, et cetera. If you have a high-end single-family home, Section 8 is probably not going to be the route that you want to take, because they are not going to be willing to pay upper-end rents. This is kind of assuming we're talking about that average rental grade B and C class property.
Right.
Yeah.
The housing authority is not going to fork out the $7,000 a month for them to live in the Highlands or whatever, right? So.
Security deposits. So some agencies will pay security deposits on behalf of their tenants. Some agencies do just pay the rent, and the recipient it's up to them to cover their own deposit. So affordability obviously can always be a factor. Just have a quick breakdown of some assumptions. If we're talking monthly rent of $1,000, maybe the tenant moves in the 15th of the month. So there's prorated rent for the month of May, and then you add June's rent on top of it because you want that due at move-in, maybe $1,000 security deposit. We make a pretty standard routine for us to ask for a higher than normal deposit if there are issues on that background check. And so we start at whatever the rent is, that's what we ask for as an equivalent security deposit. But it's pretty usual for us to say we'd like 1.5 or 2 times that amount because there's something on your background that we just don't really like. And so we'd like to just have a little bit more protection. So point being here is that affordability can become an issue. You're asking for someone to write a pretty big check all of a sudden. And so I do have a couple of security deposit replacement options that you can feel free to check out. These are basically an insurance type of program. They provide you, the homeowner, with a pretty substantial amount of coverage, but the tenant can pay significantly less than they would normally be forking over for that security deposit.
Mike, I've had some people ask, does the housing authority pay the security deposit? And answer to that is no, they don't. The tenant pays it. However, the Veterans Administration, my experience with them is that they paid not only the security deposit, but double what I've asked. I don't know if they do it on every one, but just a consideration for anybody who's looking for a Section 8 tenant that would take in a veteran.
Every single housing agency has a different, process for it. I found that some churches will, pay the deposit as well as the rent in advance for however long they're willing to do that. The Veterans Association will also cover damage occasionally, which is a bonus that you don't usually get from a typical housing provider.
So my experience with this is that I always require a 1 month's rent deposit. I prefer if the tenant themselves is paying it so that they're on the hook for it. And if they can't pay it all initially, I might put them on a payment plan if they can come up with a significant portion of it up front, over 50%, to get them up to the level of deposit that makes sense, right? So it's just like any other tenant. You want that deposit. I've seen other owners collect like $300-400 in deposit and call it a day. I would not recommend anybody do that.
Yeah, you definitely want to have that protection there. We as a company, we don't take payment plans on deposits because we've seen them not come to fruition too many times. The trend tends to be the nicer the property, the higher the class, the less deposit is being asked. So your A-class multifamily in the heart of downtown, lots of times they will just do a $200-300 deposit, but they're basing it off of the background of the tenant, credit score, income, et cetera. And so assuming we're talking about B and C class, working class tenants, you do want to make sure you've got adequate protection.
Yeah.
But how do we get paid? You've got a tenant, you're super excited, you've signed the HAP contract. Where is my money? One of the reasons we're talking about this is besides the fact that Section 8 typically pays a slightly increased rent, it is guaranteed by the government, the state, if not the federal. And we generally feel like if they have 2 groups of people over here, a non-housing recipient and a housing recipient, we're going to rely on the government to pay their bills every time. And we see that being, kind of the foolproof way to ensure that you're receiving rent payments. However, it can take a while to get this set up. We find that once we move a housing tenant in, we are waiting sometimes for weeks or even a month or 2 to try to get that first check. It is a large bureaucracy depending on which agency you're working with, and you may be waiting a little bit. So I just tried to throw out there that remember that everybody working for these agencies, essentially most of them are coming from a counseling or some sort of family advocacy background in their prior careers. Their number one priority, the thing most important to them, is to find affordable housing for those in need. Everything else, including you and your expectations on collecting payment, comes to a second place. So just kind of adjust those expectations accordingly. Be patient. The money will come. It just might take a while to get it set up.
And what my experience is with that is it's timing, it's logistics and timing based. So as long as you have all your paperwork in by a certain time frame of the month for that particular agency, you're gonna make it to where you get paid at the first of the month. If you miss the time frame, it's gonna roll to the next month.
Yeah.
Good point.
Correct.
Yeah.
Keep the paperwork, don't delay, get it to them that same day.
Get your paperwork in and everything's good. Delay on the paperwork means delay getting paid.
Yeah. Don't let that email sit in your inbox.
Jay, did we have a question?
Yeah, I was just kind of waiting for you to get through these points. There's a question related to a caseworker or a housing specialist. This person says that some caseworkers are more difficult to work with. How do you deal with this? Such as, for example, as one worker said, I had a 4-bedroom apartment, another said it was a 2-bedroom, and then one said I needed to paint a three-car garage and another not. So
That's probably egress. That's probably egress window.
egress
related,
windows, right?
right?
So
Yeah.
it sounds like you know, we come across housing specialists with the same property, are going to have 2 different opinions.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, remember that they're looking out for the tenant more than they're looking out for you. And so they will have their opinion, and they ultimately do have control to let this person move in or not. So my best advice is to accommodate as much as you can. If you can't accommodate because, for instance, there's not an egress window, ask for that compromise, ask them to do an inspection anyway, and see if they'd be willing to grant you some sort of exception. We've had instances before where a window clearly is escapable. It's just not a newly installed egress. There clearly is a closet or an area for clothing to be stored. It's just not a large closet. And we've had housing coordinators say, all right, it's close enough. So be friendly with them. Don't be combative at all, and just see if you can get them to compromise. Invite them to visit the property firsthand, walk them through it, and see if that makes a difference.
I think one thing that's also important when you're looking at a tenant, a potential tenant, is that they're going to have a voucher based on their family size, right? So that voucher is either going to be a 2-bedroom voucher, a 3-bedroom voucher, or a 4-bedroom voucher. And that's going to dictate how much the housing authority is willing to pay, right? They're willing to pay up to that 4-bedroom standard or up to that 3-bedroom standard, et cetera. So when you're talking to tenants, the first thing I ask them, say if I have a 3-bedroom place, the first thing I ask them, do you have a 3-bedroom voucher? Right? Because if you have a 2-bedroom voucher, you're never going to be able to pay the rent that I want out of this unless you're making up the difference out of your own pocket. And for me, that's too big of a risk.
That's a good point. And
Right.
asking for confirmation from that is huge, because I find that a lot of tenants just aren't quite aware of what their voucher covers.
Right.
They just weren't paying attention, or they've been in the system for so long, they're just not really fully aware. So asking to kind of get proof of that from their caseworker, getting in the communication loop with whoever their representative from the agency is immediately as soon as they apply, that's your best bet.
Yep. Second question I ask, who's your specialist and what agency are you with?
Right.
What housing authority you're with and who's your specialist? Generally, I'll know who they are because I know them, but somebody who's new would not, and that's an important question to ask.
So you'll get your money eventually. Housing always pays, which is wonderful. Sometimes it takes a little while. Where to find these tenants and how to advertise. There's a couple of websites that we've got at the top here that are sort of go-to for either housing coordinators or housing recipients. For whatever reason, this is just sort of known in that world as a place to look, in addition to the normal online sites that you are probably used to advertising in. Coalition for the Homeless has a direct input. It's just an online form that you can input your information. That'll go to their caseworkers, which they will sort through and see if maybe they have a client that they feel is a good fit. We'll talk about some syndication networks in a second, but the individual relationships with caseworkers and agencies, we find that this is the most impactful. If you have a caseworker that has done business with you in the past, they know you, they feel like they can trust you, they feel like you have a good product, they are going to ask you for product to give to their clients as their clients have needs. So rather than you waiting to find someone to come to you, they'll reach out to you and say, hey, do you have any units coming up? I've got a family of 3 or whatever, and we could use some housing. So having that caseworker in your pocket is just huge. I can't stress that enough. Take them out to lunch. If it's a church or some sort of charitable organization, send them a check if they take donations. But getting those caseworkers on your side is very important. I took a landlord's coordinator out to lunch last week, and I think we've signed 2 or 3 leases for this client in the last week, just because we had that lunch. We had some communication issues. We ended up just figuring out that text message was better for her, and now she's our best friend. But we needed to sort of have that face-to-face to really bridge that communication gap of we don't know you, you don't know us. You want them to be your friends. We advertise on a variety of syndication sites: Zillow, rentals.com, Facebook Marketplace. There's a lot of different avenues, obviously online. Craigslist is where a lot of people still tend to go to advertise. So whatever advertising you're doing normally, continue to do that. Sometimes it helps to put Section 8 accepted or Section 8 desired as a tagline. But for the most part, use the syndication sites you've been using, whatever you've done to find tenants in the past. Stick with that program. We're just accepting people that have income from this source.
And the folks with Section 8 vouchers, that's where they're looking for properties. That's where they're looking for places. They're looking the same place everybody else looks.
Their caseworkers are going to tell them about these two sites right here as well, though. And so I would say definitely get advertised on there. It doesn't cost anything that I'm aware of. I know Colorado Housing Search is definitely for free. I don't know if Go Section 8 is.
Yeah, it's free. I use it. Yeah.
So
It's important to note, though, that their voucher will work anywhere that a landlord is willing to accept it. Right. So yeah, they might go on that site, but not everybody's going to market their place on that site.
right.
Whereas everybody's marketing their place on Zillow. So they're going to be in the same places as everybody else.
Craigslist is still tried and true as well. We don't like it because you can't put 1,000 of our pretty pictures up there. But the reality is we do find tenants off of Craigslist day and age.
Yep.
One final point I wanted to make is just don't assume that because these people are Section 8 recipients, don't assume that they are not on their smartphones looking for housing on whatever app that everybody else does, just like everybody else is doing. They have the same tech that we have, and that's how people find housing these days is staring at their smartphone screen. So remember that. I'm so sorry, guys. So how do I approve an applicant and what do I look for? This is sort of going through our system of how we approve tenants. Eviction history, if someone else is paying the rent, you still should care if they have a history of being evicted in the past. You want to know if they've had issues with other landlords sending them to court. Credit scores, collections. Credit score certainly should not be a factor that you put everything into, but you should pay attention to it. I would say our average credit score across our portfolio is probably in the high 500s. But what we look for are housing related expenses, such as cell phones, utilities, things of that nature that get turned into collection accounts. If I'm going through a tenant's credit report and I see that they continually don't pay their Excel bill and Excel sends them to collections for hundreds or thousands of dollars, it speaks to some overall responsibility issues. And maybe I'm going to think twice before I approve that person.
They're all going to have bad credit. It's just a matter of what kind of bad credit they're going to have.
Medical collections, everybody under the sun has those. So we tend to put zero stock in that.
Right.
Again, for us, it's the housing related collections that we're most concerned about, or if there are eviction filings in the past.
Right.
Criminal history, we generally are not felony friendly in our company. That's sort of a personal choice that you'll have to make as a landlord. I would say that you will have a caseworker involved. And so there probably is some inherent, benefit of having that. And maybe it's not as dangerous to accept a non-violent offender who has a felony in their past for whatever minor case, because there is sort of that advocate working alongside with you if an issue would pop up. Caseworkers are going to jump in a variety of ways. Most of the time what we see is if there are issues with neighboring units or an HOA is complaining about loud music at night, fights, things of that nature, a phone call to the caseworker is going to get some help thrown your way. It's not always going to solve the problem, but besides just calling the offending tenant and complaining, hey, can you keep your music down? Having that caseworker reach out to them as well and say, hey, you have a good thing going here. Don't mess it up. Let's keep them down. It makes a difference.
Right.
Yeah, it's a lottery ticket that they have, and they need to be responsible with it. And even the housing authorities that administer these things want responsible tenants because they don't want to get a bad reputation out in the marketplace with landlords, right? So they want to make sure that these tenants are towing the line and that they have good people here that deserve what they're getting. So
Employment as well. Like we said in the beginning, this is not always 100% a rent payment. So if the tenant is working, I would say you want to look at that work history like you would any non-Section 8 tenant. Have they been there for a long time? Is employment likely to continue? If their voucher only covers 50% of the rent, it's not always an instantaneous change where if they lose their job, Section 8 comes in with the difference. If the relationship does sour, like we talked about in the last slide, again, you're going to want to use that caseworker as your biggest resource. For us, we see the biggest problems coming in with significant others. Now, Brad and Jay have some experience with that. Unwanted guests, people that come and stay, maybe it's a distant cousin or something, and they just never leave. We find that mental health issues can be extremely hard to deal with. And some of the housing agencies are going to be mental health related. Just once you have that picture going into the scene, it can be hard to just call a tenant up and say, hey, we don't like the behavior here, please stop, for obvious reasons. Neighbor unit complaints and HOA complaints. I have an example from Colorado Coalition for the homeless tenant that we have. They had a condo in a large complex, but we were getting these complaints from the HOA manager that this particular resident was continuing to sleep under their car. They had an apartment like right there down the sidewalk, but for whatever reason, their experience on the street was such that they felt safer underneath the parked car. And so we had to deal with that complaint and try to redirect the tenant to, hey, this nice apartment that you have, it would be better to use that than the street. But just be prepared for examples like that coming up maybe. Again, make that call to the caseworker, use them immediately if you aren't able to make clear progress with your tenant. And then the overall thread, yeah.
Mike, I would just jump in there real quick. That's a very rare scenario.
Yeah, it is. I would
It's
say
a very rare scenario.
yes. I would say that
I've never dealt with anything like that.
we'll go through our list of favorites in a second,
Right.
but mental health, Coalition for the Homeless, those are some of the agencies that I think you tend to see tenants that are just a little bit more difficult to deal with at times. And then the threat of losing that voucher, that usually does a great job of getting the message across. On average, there is a 2 to 3 year waiting list for some of these county programs. And so like Brad said, this is their lottery ticket. They don't want to lose this benefit. So behavior matters. And if their caseworker is threatening to take away their voucher, if they're smart, they'll act better.
By the way, if they get evicted, they lose their voucher.
Yeah, for, what is it, 2 years? They lose the voucher for 2 years, Mike?
I don't know what the thing is. I just know they lose it.
Some programs are going to say that's a permanent loss. If you mess up one time, that's it. They're going to move on to their waiting list.
Yep, because there's too many other people that want it and deserve it.
Well, I've had some tenants. One lady I remember told me it took her 4 years to get the voucher. So that's kind of another
To get it in the first place. Yeah.
Yeah, 4 years to get the voucher. And so that's kind of the advantage we have as an owner, landlord, is that, look, it took you a long time to now improve your quality of living and you're not living on somebody's couch anymore. Just take care of the place, pay your rent, be respectful to neighbors, and you can stay here indefinitely.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, that threat of losing that voucher is hugely effective. If
Yeah.
there is a problem and you decide that it's just not working out, depending on the situation, obviously, we recommend a mutual lease rescission versus using eviction as a tool. Just ending the lease early without penalty, without them owing more money, without them being able to come after you for anything, just sort of a mutual parting of ways. We use that as a tool a lot in our business as a way to sort of gentlier end the relationship versus going through eviction. Once you evict a tenant or start down that road, they have zero incentive to leave on a good note. It's just nothing positive happening anymore. So that mutual lease rescission at least puts it on a even keeled parting of ways.
Definitely works.
Hey, real quick, Mike, we do have a question that this gentleman says, I manage student housing. Can a Section 8 housing applicant be turned down with the new law? We're required to accept them should they qualify.
It's a good question. I mean, technically, it's a source of income law. And so you cannot adamantly say, we are not looking to take you because you received your income from Section 8. That being said, there is always a way to tell someone they're not qualified, if that makes sense. And so, whether you're using a credit score as an example, a lack of time in a job, a lack of rental history. If you get creative, you can find a way to say you are not the ideal tenant for these reasons. So be smart about it. Never ever say we're not approving you because you're a Section 8 recipient. That would be a clear violation of the law. But to say, you know what, we have tenant A over here, happens to be on Section 8, but they have a 500 credit score versus tenant B, non-Section 8, with 720 credit score. It's okay to make that distinction.
As long as you're doing it the same for everyone, right, Mike?
Exactly. So organizations that we tend to like, and then ones that we're not the biggest fans of, straight city or county Section 8 programs, whether it's Denver Housing, Aurora Housing, Jeffco Housing, Metro West, some of the veterans programs. VASH is going to be the biggest, the Veterans Area Housing Association. They're going to be the biggest advocates for veterans. That is an interesting sidebar. There is a really big demand among the veteran pool for felony and eviction friendly landlords. For whatever reason, veterans seem to have a higher percentage with felonies in their backgrounds or past evictions. So that might be something to consider if you are going to be going after Section 8 housing in one particular case. Being felony or eviction friendly for the veterans groups does seem to make a difference and gives you a wider pool. But just be aware, like with anything, there's no guarantee that this is going to be an awesome tenant. There could be issues with mental stability, PTSD. We've seen that in the past. The Mormon Church, the Latter-day Saints, they're awesome to work with. They typically will say, we're covering the rent for these people for however long. Maybe it's a year, maybe it's 2 years, maybe it's 6 months. They pay the deposit, they pay the rent, and then they also work as caseworkers. But there's just a lot of empathy within that world. And so we've had a really good experience with them in terms of getting results if there are issues with the tenants, and then just longevity as well. So I'm a big fan.
And they administer vouchers?
They do it on a local church level, like a local city level. So I'll get a check from the Denver Latter-day Saints. And it's not a voucher per se. There's no HAP contract to go along with it. It's just an arrangement where they are agreeing to pay for X number of months. Some of the ones that we aren't the biggest fans of: Coalition for the Homeless. Again, some of the mental health providers, Mercy Housing or Mental Health Center of Denver. It's really, really tough to deal with mental health. It's easy with a tenant that doesn't have these issues to say, hey, you're too loud, you're being aggressive to the neighbors, etc. You throw mental health into that picture and it does get a little harder to deal with. Coalition for the Homeless, again, just kind of the same thing as mental health. It's just they've had a different life experience, and that adjustment to steady housing can be a tough adjustment for people. Yeah,
I've had some bad experience with them as well. I think Jay has too.
Yeah.
Well, look, fantastic organization, and fundamentally, they're providing housing for someone that might be in the streets otherwise. And so there's a huge human factor in there. Just unfortunately, we've had bad experiences.
Yeah, Mercy Housing has a lot of projects to house some of the formerly homeless. So
they do. So that's basically it. We'll open up to questions. Again, here's all my relevant contact info. If you just want to have some general property management discussions, feel free to hit me up, shoot me an email, give me a call, find us on Facebook or whatever. I've got a bunch of informative videos on YouTube. Happy to dole out free advice. Obviously, I'd like to have you hire me as your property manager at some point, but if you'd just like to ask us questions, happy to do that. I can provide you with a copy of the lease that we use at our company, things of that nature.
And we have plenty of time right now, Mike. Thank you very much for being efficient. So any and all questions for Mike or Jay or I, Section 8 related or not Section 8 related, just let them fly.
Mike, you're good if we share the presentation?
Oh,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
We will send out the recording of this after, as well as the slides.
Well, I'll just add that Brad and I have had pretty good experience, well, actually really good with Section 8 over the last year with COVID, just because the nice thing about that is where the tenant does pay a portion of the rent. If they lose their job or a reduction of income, they just go to the housing specialist and get their rent portion adjusted. And so we've virtually had no problems with that with COVID. with tenants not paying rent or along those lines.
Haven't had a single delinquency.
That's a good point. Residential collection overall last year was better than everybody thought it would be, but it is sort of a sliding scale as you go east along Colfax or get more into North Aurora or South Aurora. Those collection rates did diminish pretty substantially. So having that guaranteed rent, it's nice. That's probably one of the biggest benefits.
Right. And I will say, my overall experience with housing, with working with Section 8 tenants and the housing authorities has been very positive. There's a lot of things that I really like about the program. One of the things is, most of these voucher holders are, generally speaking, a single mom who's got young kids, really unable to hold a full-time job and take care of a family at the same time. And, the programs really help to stabilize the children. I remember my very first Section 8 tenant I had for a year, and when I went to renew her for the second year, she just thanked me up and down because she said, this will be the first time my kids have ever gone to the same school twice. And, so there is a lot of benefit to this program. And that tenant is still with me since 2011. So I've had her for 10 years. Her kids have grown up in my unit. And, these folks are not necessarily used to having good quality places to live in their life. And if you provide a good quality place to live and everything, y'all get along, they will never leave. I mean, our turnover is very small, very, very minuscule.
It's not always family too, or big groups of people. We see a lot of senior citizens that just can't hack in on Social Security alone.
Right.
So he comes in and bridges that gap, and those have been some of my favorite tenants.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. All right, we're lighting it up with questions. Jay, let's have it.
Yeah, there's a few. So this one is a non-Section 8 related type question. She says, if I have a tenant month to month holdover who has lived at the property for over a year, do they need a 30-day notice to get out or a 91-day notice if we want to get rid of them?
Unless the lease has a longer holdover clause of 30 days, that cuts it. If there's nothing mentioned, it's 30 days.
Okay.
So that's just a non-renewal of lease. That's not an eviction at all.
Yeah, I don't know where a 90 would come from, but 30
Right.
days.
Yep.
Another one says, are individual units qualified or each building? I think we know that it's individual units. There are Section 8 based projects or Section 8 based properties that are multifamily, but that's out of our scope. We don't run those or own those ourselves.
Generally speaking, that's a landlord who has a property that's designated as rent controlled. And they've got a certain number of units within that property that are, rent restricted to certain degrees, et cetera. But for a voucher holder, as we mentioned earlier, they can go anywhere they want as long as somebody will take them. And so it's generally an individual unit unless the owner wants to make all their units Section 8, but that's up to the owner.
This lady asks, what do you do if you have a qualified tenant and no one comes out to inspect for over 3 months, et cetera? Is there a hierarchy to urge them to come out?
Yeah, go up the chain of command. I would call the Section 8 office directly, just whatever number is plastered on the internet, call them and say, I'm not getting a response from so-and-so. I need to speak with someone else, and then call back until you get an answer. Again, these are big organizations, a lot of people. So there's always someone higher up that you can speak to.
And I'd almost contradict your lot of people, because what happened with COVID is they furloughed a bunch of people. And so we haven't gotten the responses that we were typically used to getting. And so, you have to stay on top of it and be in there and move up the ladder a lot. Yep.
3 months that's absurdly long though. I mean, it really should be.
3 months is just somebody forgot about you.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Or that person that had your case or whatever you want to call it is no longer with them. That happened to me. They were no longer there at the agency any longer. It never got transferred to whoever was supposed to take over. And so it just got dropped.
The poor tenant that's just got their housing situation completely up in the air. That's awful.
Well, and the tenant needs to be advocating for themselves as well and get in there and talk to those folks as well.
We feel pretty comfortable giving housing coordinators our lockbox codes. We know most of these coordinators. We've worked with them for a while, so they'll do the process up too. You don't always take time out of the day to go schedule and meet them someplace. Just
Right.
give them the lockbox code and let them go in on their own time and get it done.
All right, this person asks, we rented to our first Section 8 applicant during COVID when inspections weren't being done. Once inspections start, are they one time or annual? And again, we know that they do the inspection prior to move-in. Their housing requires that. And they used to do them annually, but aren't they done biannually now, Mike?
I think it's depending on the organization.
Mhm.
Everybody-
Yeah, I know Metro West, for example, went biannual. They just didn't have the resources to do it annually anymore.
But does like the other agencies like Colorado Coalition or Veterans, do they do annual inspections?
Some of them will. I know that we've got Section 8 agencies that don't do inspections at all, though. We had one group
Really?
to send them pictures, but
Wow.
Oh, okay.
everybody's got their own different process. So
Yeah.
All right. I guess I'll ask this question. I'm not fully understanding, but it says, are there times where you seek out a Section 8 over another?
yeah, if you have a product in a rougher community, I would say it makes sense. Again, that bump in the rent versus market rent and what tenants are willing to pay, sometimes that makes a difference. And if you've got a real B or C class community, even if your unit is nice, but the community has a reputation amongst potential renters as not being safe or what have you, it makes sense to seek that out.
So that's the question is, are you seeking Section 8 tenant over a traditional tenant? I just want to make sure we clarify the question, make sure we answer it right. Or are we talking about choosing one Section 8 tenant over another Section 8 tenant?
Yeah, that's from Ms. Crosby. If you can clarify that. I mean, most of my tenants in B neighborhoods and B minus are 90% of Section 8, just because it works so well based off everything we've been talking about here. And I would choose I'd rather have a Section 8 than not Section 8. So,
Right. And if I have 5 applicants and they're all Section 8, I'm going to pick the best Section 8 applicant, just like I would any other scenario, right?
You're allowed to pick and choose and take the person with the higher credit, higher income, what have you.
Right.
yeah, and you can be as choosy with Section 8 versus not Section 8. Just because Colorado law made it so that we have to consider accepting Section 8 doesn't mean we have to choose them over a non-Section 8. We just have to say, no longer can we say, nope, sorry, I don't accept Section 8. We have to at least say that it's open to it. So
There's always a reason to deny someone.
another person asks, does the housing authority report rental income to the IRS or the state for tax purposes? Yes.
You fill out a W-9 and you'll get your 1099 just like you would if you were doing it with Mike at Mobby.
Yeah. Well, that's everything. We've gone through all the questions. These are all good ones.
Fantastic. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. If that's okay, Brad.
I'll just leave it up there. Just leave your name and info up there for people and we'll just go back there. So yeah, unless there's anything else, appreciate everybody for joining us and we will definitely post this. So we will be sending out the slides in an email to everybody that signed up. We will also send out the recording and then we will post the recording on our website under the education section of our website. You can always go back there at any time and look this back up and flip through it. I mean, you'll be able to scroll through it. You won't have to listen to the whole thing, but you'll be able to get through it. So awesome, guys. Thanks for joining. And we will have our next one in a couple of months. Look forward to it. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks everyone for attending.
Appreciate it, Mike. Thank you very much.